The service dog's bark echoed through the entire military hospital. Doctors stopped walking. Patients looked up from the waiting room. Two military police officers instinctively stepped toward the hallway. At the center of the commotion stood a massive black and tan German shepherd, pulling so hard against his leash that three experienced handlers struggled to keep their footing. "Hold him. I've got him. Don't let him reach the door." The dog wasn't trying to attack anyone. He wasn't snapping wildly. He wasn't out of control because he was vicious. He looked terrified. His deep brown eyes darted from one unfamiliar face to another, his breathing quick and shallow, as every new sound seemed to make him even more anxious. For nearly 45 minutes, no one had been able to calm him. Then someone quietly laughed. "If Nurse Olivia thinks she's so good with difficult patients." A man folded his arms with a sarcastic smile. "Why don't we leave her alone with him?" Several people exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody laughed, because everyone knew exactly which dog stood in front of them. His name was Shadow, and he had spent nearly 7 years serving alongside American veterans before retirement. No one had ever seen him like this. But what nobody inside Walter Reed Military Medical Center knew was that Shadow was about to recognize someone he hadn't seen in almost a decade. Before we continue, if you enjoy heartfelt stories about military heroes, loyal service dogs, and the extraordinary people who change lives through kindness, make sure to subscribe. And tell us in the comments, have you ever met a dog you'll never forget? We'd love to hear your story. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center had welcomed retired military working dogs for years. Most visits were uneventful: routine health evaluations, mobility checks, behavioral assessments. Occasionally, a dog needed a little extra patience adjusting to retirement. Shadow's appointment had been expected to be no different. But within minutes of arriving, everything changed. Commander Daniel Hayes parked his truck outside the military working dog wing just after 8 in the morning. He stepped out first, then opened the passenger door. Shadow quietly jumped down beside him. The German shepherd was 9 years old. His muzzle had begun turning silver. His once dark military harness showed years of careful use, now faded from sunlight and countless training exercises. An American flag patch rested on one side. A small engraved brass tag read simply, Shadow Commander Hayes smiled. "You ready, partner?" Shadow looked up at him. His tail moved once. That was enough. Hayes scratched behind his ears. "It won't take long. We'll be home before lunch." For a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Inside the hospital lobby, several veterans recognized the German shepherd immediately. "That's Shadow. I heard he served overseas. Beautiful dog." Children waiting with their families smiled as Shadow quietly walked beside Commander Hayes. He accepted gentle attention without hesitation. A little girl waved. Shadow calmly wagged his tail. One nurse whispered, "What a sweetheart." Commander Hayes smiled proudly. He usually is. Everything changed the moment they entered the military working dog wing. Shadow stopped walking. His ears rose. His body became rigid. Commander Hayes immediately noticed. "Easy. It's all right." The German shepherd stared toward the examination hallway. His breathing grew faster. The polished marble floors reflected bright sunlight, pouring through enormous floor-to-ceiling windows. Medical carts rolled quietly past. Doors opened and closed. Voices echoed through the corridor. None of those sounds bothered most dogs, but something about this hallway made Shadow freeze. Commander Hayes gently encouraged him. "Come on." Nothing. Another step. Still nothing. Finally, Shadow reluctantly followed. Every few feet he stopped again. looking over his shoulder, listening, matching. Almost as though expecting someone who never appeared, Dr. Rebecca Lawson greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Commander." "Morning. Routine retirement evaluation?" Hayes nodded. "Annual physical behavior assessment, joint mobility. That's all." The veterinarian smiled. "We'll take good care of him." Commander Hayes believed her, so did Shadow, at least. For another 30 seconds, inside the examination room, everything had been carefully prepared. Soft lighting, rubber flooring instead of slippery tile, fresh water, minimal equipment visible. The hospital staff understood retired military dogs, or so they believed. Shadow entered, paused, slowly walked around the room, then positioned himself directly beside the exit door, watching it. Never blinking, Dr. Lawson remained patient. No rush. She sat several feet away. "We'll let him settle." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nothing changed. Commander Hayes quietly gave familiar commands. "Sit." Shadow remained standing. "Stay." He hadn't moved. "Easy." The dog's breathing became heavier. Dr. Lawson carefully stepped forward with her stethoscope. Shadow immediately backed away. Not growling, not lunging, simply refusing. Another veterinarian tried the same result. A behavioral specialist entered. She sat quietly on the floor, waited, spoke softly. Still nothing. Outside the room, doctors gathered near the observation window. Military handlers quietly discussed possibilities. One whispered, "I've never seen him this nervous." Another nodded. "Neither have I." Commander Hayes rubbed his forehead. "This started the second we entered this wing." Hospital Director Richard Coleman arrived after hearing the commotion. At 62, he had spent decades overseeing military hospitals. "What happened?" Dr. Lawson answered honestly. "We're not sure. Has he shown aggression? No. Has anyone been bitten? Not even close." The director looked through the observation glass. Shadow stood motionless beside the exit, watching every movement, every sound, every person. "He doesn't look aggressive," Commander Hayes quietly replied. "He looks scared." An hour later, 3 experienced military dog handlers volunteered to help. Each had worked with service dogs for years. Each believed they might reach Shadow. The first approached calmly. Nothing. The second tried familiar military commands. No response. The third used Shadow's favorite rubber training toy. Normally, Shadow would have rushed toward it. Today, he never even looked. Commander Hayes slowly sighed. "I've never seen him ignore that toy." Word spread quickly throughout the hospital. The famous retired service dog, who had calmly worked beside veterans for years, couldn't complete a simple health evaluation. Doctors paused outside the room. Nurses quietly watched from the hallway. Patients wondered what had happened. Among them, a trauma nurse named Olivia Bennett quietly finished checking a patient's chart. She heard the barking, looked down the hallway, then continued walking. She didn't rush toward the crowd. She simply returned to work. That's who Olivia was. She never looked for attention. Around noon, the staff gathered outside the examination room again. Shadow had now refused every attempt to approach him. Commander Hayes looked exhausted. Dr. Lawson lowered her clipboard. "We may need to reschedule." Before anyone could respond, a senior staff member looked toward Olivia, who had just walked past, carrying medical supplies. He smirked. "Well, I've heard people say Nurse Bennett has a way with difficult patients." A few people smiled awkwardly. He continued, "Maybe she can calm a military dog too." Someone quietly replied, "She's a trauma nurse, not a dog trainer." Another voice added, "Exactly. If she thinks compassion fixes everything, let's find out." The hallway became uncomfortable. Commander Hayes immediately frowned. "That's not funny." But the man shrugged. "We're only asking." Director Coleman remained silent, watching. Olivia looked from the staff to Shadow, then back again. She understood exactly what they were doing. They weren't asking for help. They were expecting her to fail, to prove that kindness alone wasn't enough. She smiled politely. "If Commander Hayes is comfortable with it, I'll go inside." Commander Hayes hesitated. "You don't have to," Olivia answered gently. "I know, but I'd like to." The commander studied her face. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She simply looked concerned for the frightened dog. Finally, he slowly nodded. "All right. But if you feel uncomfortable, walk away." "I will." One of the handlers unlocked the examination room door. Another quietly muttered, "This won't last 30 seconds." Several doctors moved toward the observation window. Nurses gathered behind them. Even waiting patients looked curiously through the glass. The room became completely silent. Olivia stepped inside. She didn't speak. She didn't look directly at Shadow. She quietly placed her clipboard on a nearby chair. Then, instead of walking toward the dog, she slowly sat down on the floor, several feet away. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Shadow turned toward her immediately. The room outside held its breath. No one knew what would happen next. But everyone was certain of one thing. Within moments, the nurse would come running back out. Instead, something happened that no one watching expected. Shadow stopped barking. The German shepherd stood perfectly still. His ears slowly lifted. His breathing became quieter. And for the first time in hours, he stared at Olivia. Not with fear, but with recognition. The observation hallway fell completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. 20 pairs of eyes remained fixed on the examination room. Shadow stood motionless. The German shepherd who had barked, paced, and refused every person for nearly 4 hours simply stared at Olivia Bennett. She didn't move toward him. She didn't call his name. She didn't stretch out her hand. She just remained seated on the floor, calm, waiting. Commander Daniel Hayes quietly whispered, "What's he doing?" Dr. Rebecca Lawson shook her head. "I don't know." Director Richard Coleman folded his arms. "Neither does anyone else." Inside the room, Shadow slowly lowered his head, his ears, which had been standing rigidly forward all morning, relaxed. His breathing became slower. Olivia looked down at the floor instead of directly into his eyes. She knew better than to force a connection. Several long seconds passed. The room remained perfectly still. Then, Shadow took one careful step. Outside the glass, a veterinary technician whispered. He moved. No one answered. Everyone was afraid that even speaking might interrupt whatever was happening. Another step, then another. The German shepherd wasn't obeying a command. He was making a choice. Commander Hayes felt his heart racing. This doesn't make sense. Shadow had ignored everyone. Experienced handlers, behavioral specialists, veterinarians, even him. Now, he was slowly walking towards someone he had supposedly never met. Olivia quietly smiled, barely enough for anyone to notice. She softly spoke for the first time. "You're all right." Her voice was gentle, almost a whisper. Shadow stopped only a few feet away. He studied her face. His intelligent brown eyes never blinked. It felt less like a dog looking at a stranger, and more like someone searching through an old memory. Outside, the senior staff member who had mocked Olivia earlier crossed his arms confidently. "He'll start barking again." Nobody answered. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Instead, something entirely different happened. Shadow slowly lowered his nose. He leaned forward and carefully sniffed Olivia's hand. The nurse never reached toward him. She simply allowed him to decide. After a few moments, the German shepherd gently rested his chin against her knee. A quiet gasp escaped several people watching through the glass. Commander Hayes stared in disbelief. "No," Dr. Lawson whispered. "I don't believe it." Olivia slowly lifted one hand. She gently scratched behind Shadow's left ear, exactly where Commander Hayes always did. The German shepherd immediately closed his eyes. His tail gave one slow wag, then another. Commander Hayes quietly smiled. "I haven't seen him do that in weeks." Director Coleman looked around the hallway. No one had expected this, not even Olivia. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She simply continued sitting beside the dog, as though spending quiet time together was the most natural thing in the world. 5 minutes later, Dr. Lawson cautiously entered the room. She stayed several feet away. "Olivia," the nurse looked up. "Would it be all right if I listened to his heart?" Olivia looked toward Shadow. The German shepherd calmly remained beside her. She gently stroked his neck. "What do you think, buddy?" Shadow looked at the doctor, then back at Olivia, without moving away. Dr. Lawson slowly stepped closer. For the first time that day, her stethoscope touched Shadow's chest. Nothing happened, no barking, no pulling, no panic. Only calm breathing. Outside the room, applause almost broke out. Commander Hayes raised one hand. "Wait." Everyone became quiet again. He couldn't take his eyes off the dog. The examination continued. Normal. Heart. Strong. Joints. Healthy eyes. Excellent. Everything that had seemed impossible only minutes earlier now happened effortlessly. Every time Dr. Lawson reached toward Shadow, the dog glanced briefly at Olivia. She gave him a reassuring smile. He stayed perfectly still. After nearly 20 minutes, the examination was complete. Dr. Lawson smiled with relief. "We're done." Commander Hayes slowly entered the room. "Good job, partner." Shadow looked at him. His tail wagged. Then, without hesitation, he turned back toward Olivia. The commander laughed softly. "I see how it is." Everyone else laughed with him. The tension that had filled the hospital all morning had finally disappeared. As Olivia stood to leave, Shadow quietly stood too. She walked toward the examination room door. The German shepherd followed. Commander Hayes called gently, "Shadow." The dog stopped, looked back, then looked at Olivia again, almost asking permission. Olivia smiled warmly. "You should stay with your commander." Shadow immediately turned around and walked back beside Hayes. The commander blinked. He actually listened. Dr. Lawson smiled. "I've never seen anything like this." Outside the room, Director Coleman approached Olivia. "Nurse Bennett." "Yes, sir?" "I'd like to ask you something." "Of course. Have you worked with military service dogs before?" Olivia hesitated. "Not professionally." Commander Hayes looked curious. "Then how did you know exactly how to approach him?" She smiled politely. "I didn't. I simply waited." The director studied her expression. It felt like she wasn't telling the whole story. Not because she wanted to hide anything, but because she didn't think it mattered. The senior staff member who had mocked her earlier finally spoke. "There has to be another explanation." Commander Hayes turned toward him. "What explanation?" He ignored everyone else, then suddenly acts like she's known him forever. Several people quietly nodded. They had all noticed it. The way Shadow watched Olivia, the way he followed her, the way he relaxed the moment she entered. It wasn't ordinary trust. It looked familiar. Director Coleman gently asked, "Olivia, have you ever met Shadow before today?" The hallway became completely silent. Olivia looked down at the German shepherd. Shadow calmly rested beside Commander Hayes, but his eyes never left her. She smiled softly. Before she could finish, Commander Hayes interrupted. Wait. He slowly knelt beside Shadow. There was something attached to the dog's faded military harness, a small, leather pouch, one he had almost forgotten about. He carefully opened it. Inside was an old photograph. Its edges had faded with time. Commander Hayes looked at it, then froze. His expression changed completely. What? Dr. Lawson stepped closer. What is it? Without saying a word, Commander Hayes turned the photograph around. Everyone looked. The picture showed a much younger Olivia. Nearly 10 years earlier, sitting on the grass, lawing, with a young German shepherd lying happily beside her. The same bent left ear, the same dark eyes, the same white patch beneath his chin, the same dog, Shadow. The hallway became utterly silent. Director Coleman slowly looked from the photograph to Olivia, then back to Shadow. His voice barely rose above a whisper. You knew each other. Olivia's eyes filled with emotion. She gently nodded. Yes, I did. No one spoke, not because they had finally found the answer, but because they suddenly realized the real story had only just begun. If this reunion has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like these remind us that loyalty isn't measured by time. It's measured by the bonds we never truly lose. The hallway was so quiet that the faint hum of the hospital lights seemed unusually loud. No one could take their eyes off the old photograph. Commander Daniel Hayes continued holding it in both hands. A younger Olivia Bennett sat beneath a large oak tree, laughing, as a young German shepherd leaned happily against her shoulder. The dog's left ear bent slightly at the tip. A small white patch rested beneath his chin. There was no doubt it was Shadow. Director Richard Coleman looked at Olivia. You knew him. Olivia slowly nodded. Yes, but not in the way everyone is probably thinking. Commander Hayes carefully handed her the photograph. I've carried this in his harness for almost 7 years. Olivia looked down at it, her fingers trembling slightly. I never imagined I'd see this again. Dr. Rebecca Lawson quietly asked, when was it taken? Olivia smiled through watery eyes. Almost 10 years ago. The hallway remained silent. Everyone wanted to hear the story. Olivia took a slow breath. Before I became a nurse, I volunteered with a nonprofit that worked with military service dogs. She gently looked toward Shadow. Some dogs couldn't go directly from training into active duty. They needed temporary foster homes. Some stayed for weeks, some stayed for months. Commander Hayes listened carefully. And Shadow? Olivia smiled. He stayed with my family for almost 11 months. Several nurses looked surprised. I didn't know programs like that existed. Olivia nodded. They're small, and most people never hear about them. The goal wasn't to make the dogs love us. It was to prepare them. So when the military called, they'd be confident enough to begin their real work. She looked at Shadow again. We always knew they weren't ours forever. Director Coleman quietly asked, so you raised him? For a little while, Olivia smiled. No, the military raised him. I simply gave him a home between chapters. Commander Hayes slowly looked at Shadow. You never told me. Olivia looked surprised. There wasn't anything to tell. I honestly believed he'd forgotten me years ago. Commander Hayes smiled. I don't think he ever did. The commander slowly knelt beside Shadow. You remember her, don't you? The German shepherd quietly stood. He walked toward Olivia. This time, there were no cameras, no audience, no examination, just a dog walking towards someone who had once made him feel safe. He gently rested his head against her shoulder. Olivia wrapped one arm around his neck, not tightly, just enough for him to know he was home, even if only for a moment. Several people quietly wiped tears from their eyes. The senior staff member who had mocked Olivia earlier lowered his head. He slowly walked toward her. Nurse Bennett. She looked up. I'm sorry. The hallway became still. I thought, he sighed. I thought you were trying to prove something. Olivia smiled kindly. I wasn't. I was only trying to help him. The man nodded. I know, and I owe you an apology. Olivia extended her hand. You don't owe me anything. If today taught us anything, it's that sometimes we don't know someone's story. The man shook her hand. Thank you. Later that afternoon, Shadow's paperwork was finally complete. Commander Hayes gathered his folder. Looks like we're all finished. Dr. Lawson smiled. He's in excellent health. Commander Hayes laughed. Except he nearly gave everyone a heart attack. The room filled with warm laughter. Even Director Coleman smiled. I think we were all more nervous than Shadow. Before leaving, Commander Hayes turned toward Olivia. Would you mind taking a walk with us? She looked surprised. Just around the hospital garden. I think he'd like that. She nodded. I'd love to. Outside, warm afternoon sunlight covered the peaceful hospital grounds. Veterans sat on benches. Families walked through the gardens. American flags moved gently in the breeze. Shadow walked between Commander Hayes and Olivia. His pace was slow, relaxed, peaceful. Several visitors smiled as they passed. One elderly veteran quietly stopped. Beautiful shepherd. Commander Hayes proudly replied, He sure is. The veteran looked toward Olivia. Is he yours? Olivia smiled gently. No. He belongs with his commander. Commander Hayes looked at her. I think he'd disagree. They both laughed. Shadow looked up at them. His tail wagged. They reached a quiet bench beneath a maple tree. Commander Hayes sat down. So, I've got to ask. Olivia smiled. What? Back there, when everyone left you alone with him. Weren't you scared? She thought for a moment. A little. Commander Hayes looked surprised. You were? She nodded. I wasn't afraid of Shadow. I was afraid he wouldn't remember me. The commander smiled. I think that was never a possibility. Olivia gently scratched beneath Shadow's collar. You know, when he left our foster home, I promised myself I wouldn't cry. Commander Hayes laughed softly. Did it work? She smiled. Not even a little. The commander looked at Shadow. I'm glad he had you. Olivia quietly shook her head. And I'm grateful he had you. You gave him the life he was trained for. Commander Hayes looked down at the loyal German shepherd resting beside them. He gave me a lot more than I ever gave him. A few weeks later, Director Richard Coleman introduced a new volunteer initiative at Walter Reed. It partnered with military foster organizations that prepared future service dogs and supported retired military canines as they transitioned into civilian life. When reporters later asked what inspired the program, he smiled. One quiet nurse and one remarkable dog. Near the entrance of the military working dog wing, a simple framed plaque was placed on the wall. It didn't mention medals, or ranks, or heroic missions. It simply read, Dogs may serve many people throughout their lives, but they never forget the ones who first made them feel safe. Every visitor entering the wing stopped to read it. Many smiled, some quietly wiped away tears. Months later, Commander Hayes returned for Shadow's annual checkup. This time, the German shepherd walked confidently through the same hospital doors. He didn't hesitate. He didn't freeze. He didn't bark. He calmly walked beside his commander until they reached the military working dog wing, standing near the nurse's station. Olivia looked up from a patient chart. She smiled. "Well, look who's back." Shadow's ears immediately lifted, his tail wagged, not because he was excited to be in a hospital, but because he had found two of the people who meant the most to him. Commander Hayes looked at Olivia and smiled. "I think hospitals aren't so scary anymore." Olivia gently knelt beside Shadow. "I don't think it was ever the hospital." Commander Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She looked into Shadow's calm brown eyes. "I think he just needed one familiar face to remind him he was never alone." Commander Hayes nodded. "I think you're right." As they walked down the bright hallway together, doctors, nurses, veterans, and patients smiled at the peaceful German Shepherd. Just weeks earlier, many had believed he was an aggressive dog no one could handle. Now they understood the truth. Shadow had never needed someone stronger. He had simply needed someone he remembered. Someone who had once given him a place to rest. Because years may pass, uniforms may change, lives may take different paths. But a loyal dog's heart never forgets the people who first taught it what home feels like. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a dog who became part of your family? Or met one you'll never forget? Tell us their name and your favorite memory in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another journey celebrating the incredible bond between people and their dogs.